So my name's Jack Robinson. I'm a director of research at Sorenson Impact. I'm joined by John Gargani. John, you want to talk a little bit about your work and your role?
Yeah, so I just finished up my term as the president of the American Evaluation Association. That's an association for the professionals who measure impact. It's been around about 30 years. We have over 7,500 members. And we have an annual conference every year where we draw about 3,000 to 4,000 people. It's one of maybe 200 associations around the world that are dedicated to evaluation.
So one of the things that we talked about was that, evaluation it's not really a new thing. It's actually, something that's been around for a very long time. Why is it getting this kind of day in the sun in social innovation?
Well, for those of us who are evaluators, we think it's had its day in the sun for about a century. It's about as long in the US, I think you could say it's been developing. The term evaluation was used probably for the first time as we currently use it in the 1930s. But yeah, now it's becoming extremely kind of hip and cool. And I think the reason is that there are more and more organizations and players from not just the public sector, but the private sector interested in creating impact. And as you become more and more interested in that, the idea of how you measure impact and understand it, use it to improve people's lives, that makes evaluation particularly important.
So I think one of the things that we've heard, especially around evaluation, is did it work or did it not work? Mm-hmm. And it's this very kind of binary drive. And
right.
how do you respond to that?
Well, I think that we talk in a kind of shorthand in evaluation. We use short phrases to represent larger ideas, and when we say it works, we're not really talking about something that's binary. What we really mean is, we want to understand whether something has worked, for whom it's worked, how it's worked for them, under what conditions it's worked, what does work mean, right? And we want to understand that, and when we say it works, that's really what we're talking about. And most organizations that are trying to create change are moving along a developmental path, right? They've got some new idea, they're trying to be innovative, no one's tried this before. And at that point, what does it mean for them to understand its impact? It's really quite nascent. They're trying to really just sort of understand what it is. And as that moves along the developmental path, evaluation comes into play in different ways and in more rigorous ways.
So how do you feel that you can kind of educate folks that are new to this, that they're entering into the world of evaluation and in their mind they think, okay, I need to be at this point to be very definitive and very clear on what the impact is. How do you help them kind of come along that curve?
Well, I think that's a real challenge for the field of evaluation. We've been very prone to look internally, to talk to each other rather than focus externally. The association over the past couple of years has been taking more efforts to talk to other audiences that are interested in evaluation who aren't specifically evaluators. Some of the ways are training. We offer training through AEA, and also we have a couple of journals that are peer-reviewed, places for people to read about evaluation. But I think that there's a level of complexity about it that doesn't go away. But you can learn it, and you can become quite skilled at it with the right level of commitment and effort. And I think what many investors are probably looking to do is not to be evaluators, but to be good users of evaluation, to know what kind of information serves their needs, to be able to communicate that to professionals who do evaluation, to talk to them, and to use the information that's provided in ways that really promote their interests.
So another thing that I think we've discussed a little bit is with the emergence of the private sector being involved in some very complex social challenges and how evaluation plays a role in this tension between accountability and responsibility and having real clarity around that. Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. The term accountability gets used quite a lot, the idea that you want to do evaluation because you're accountable. But there's an important distinction between accountability and responsibility. You're accountable to people who can hold you to account. So if you're the CEO, you're accountable to the board, right? The board's accountable to shareholders. And that's a relationship that's important, and it's one where the group to whom you are accountable can exert some pressure over what you do and dismiss you if they don't like that. When you move outside of more traditional business operations and dedicate yourself to creating a better world for people who may not be a part of any commercial transaction that you're engaged in. You have a responsibility to them in a different way than you do to shareholders. You can't quite say you're accountable to them because they can't hold you to account, but you have a responsibility. And the fact that there's a different power dynamic there makes that responsibility even more important and raises questions around how and when you should act, and the inclusion of those stakeholders and regular people in the sorts of decision-making that you do.
So I think that's a really interesting tension, and it brings to the surface this idea of transparency, and I think that that's what we're also striving to move towards. Do you feel that evaluation, embedding this into these social processes, is helping with transparency around those forces?
I think it can. I think there are quite a number of instances where it has. One question to ask is, why do we value transparency? And, some of the reason is we just think it's right. We would like to know what's going on. You affect other people. We should understand. There are other reasons as well. I mean, there's a belief that if we get the right information about impact into various kinds of markets, those markets become more efficient with respect to impact. It stops being an externality that's not brought into the market transaction, but it's actually valued, and it changes the way market transactions take place. I think that's really a critical part and a critical role for evaluation. But evaluation itself isn't going to transform markets. There are other structures that need to be there, other parts of what sometimes is referred to as the enabling environment for that information to really change consumer behavior and investor behavior.
So if you could think, 10 or 15 years down the line about evaluation, and if we're perhaps on our way to, in some ways, institutionalizing this way of pursuing knowledge, what is that? How do you envision that actually transferring, especially when we think about the scale of do we do something as rigorous as possible, or is there something where we do something that's just good enough to answer the question at hand?
Yeah, I think that if I look 10 to 15 years down the line, I would really like to see a greater professional norm or standard defining what we sometimes refer to as fit-for-purpose evaluation. What is good enough? And in different contexts, what good enough is going to be different. So, again, if an organization is moving along a developmental continuum, it's sort of in the beginning stages versus a very mature stage, the kind of information you need is different. The consequences of not getting it right, are they high or low? Is there urgency if you don't act? Right? All of this fits into a notion of what would be good enough information. And I think that evaluators and others could develop those norms, and I think that would be useful. If that gets tied to the way we use technology to collect data and to aggregate our knowledge across various efforts to do this, plus giving voice to stakeholders through technology and other means, then I think we really have a set of tools that allow people to start off their efforts to create impact at where they would be maybe in year 3 or 4 now.
Well, so those are some great thoughts for the future. Thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you.